There are promises that make a man leave behind an entire lifetime of solitude. This is the story of one such promise. The autumn wind swept across Red River Valley like the breath of something ancient and knowing, carrying with it the scent of dying grass and the whisper of winter's approach. The year was 1886, and the land stretched out endless and amber beneath a sky so vast it made even the strongest men feel small. This was Texas in its raw beauty before the railroads carved it up, before progress tamed what was never meant to be tame. Cole Brennan sat motionless atop his sorrel mare on a ridge overlooking the valley below. At 59 years old, he had the weathered look of a man who had lived hard and survived harder. His beard, more silver than brown, now reached halfway down his chest. Deep lines carved his face like rivers cut through stone. His hands, scarred and calloused from decades of ranch work and harder years as a Texas Ranger, rested easy on the pommel of his saddle. A pair of Colt revolvers hung at his hips, worn smooth from use. A Winchester rifle rode in the scabbard at his knee. He had learned the patience of the land, had become part of it, as silent and enduring as the mesquite trees that dotted the valley floor. The deer stood 30 yards downslope, a young buck with antlers just beginning to show promise. Cole's finger rested lightly on the trigger of his raised rifle. One shot clean and quick, enough meat to last 2 weeks if he smoked it properly. His eyes narrowed, calculating wind and distance with the automatic precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Then he heard it, a sound so faint that most men would have missed it entirely. A cry, weak and desperate, carried on the wind from somewhere deep in the valley below. Cole's head turned sharply. The deer bolted crashing through the underbrush with white tail flashing. But Cole had already forgotten about it. He was already moving his massive frame surprisingly agile as he urged his mare down the steep slope, rifle gripped tight in hands the size of bear paws. The overturned stagecoach lay at the bottom of a dry wash like a broken toy some giant child had discarded. One wheel still spun slowly in the air, creaking with each rotation. The horses were gone, their traces cut or broken, probably scattered miles into the grassland by now. Pieces of luggage lay strewn across the rocks. A woman's hat, crushed. A leather satchel split open, its contents spilling into the dust. No bodies, no driver, no guard, just the wreckage and that sound. That terrible, pitiful sound of a child in pain. Cole dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground as he scanned for danger. 17 years of living alone had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. This could be an ambush, could be bandits using a child as bait. His hand moved to the Colt at his right hip, thumb resting on the hammer. But what he found was worse than any ambush. She lay pinned beneath a heavy wooden crate that had fallen from the coach's cargo hold. Her small body twisted at an unnatural angle. Blonde hair matted with blood and dirt, eyes closed. One thin arm stretched out as if reaching for help that had never come. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Cole's heart, that organ he had thought dead and buried 17 years ago, suddenly hammered against his ribs like a caged animal trying to break free. He dropped to his knees beside her, his rough hands surprisingly gentle as they searched for a pulse at her throat. There, faint but steady. She was alive. Thank God she was alive. The crate's weight had trapped her legs. Cole could see the unnatural bend in her left shin, the way her feet lay motionless even as he touched them. He had seen injuries like this before during his years as a ranger during the cattle drives, where men got crushed beneath stampeding hooves. This child would not walk again, not without a miracle. But she would live if he could get her out, if he could get her warm, if he could stop the bleeding from the gash on her forehead. Cole Brennan had not prayed in 17 years, not since the day he buried his wife Catherine and his daughter Lily in the hard Texas ground, their bodies wasted by yellow fever, their deaths a mockery of every promise he had made to keep them safe. But now, crouched in the dust beside this broken child, he found words forming on his lips. Simple words, desperate words. "Help me save her." He worked quickly, his massive strength put to use as he gripped the crate's frame and lifted. His back screamed in protest. His arms trembled. Sweat poured down his face despite the cool air. But inch by inch, the weight rose, and he was able to drag the girl free with his other hand, pulling her clear of the wreckage. She moaned a sound so small and pitiful it cut him deeper than any wound he had ever received. Her eyes fluttered open, blue as a summer sky, unfocused and filled with pain. And something else, something that made Cole's chest tighten with a fury he hadn't felt in years. Fear, pure, absolute terror. Cole tore his own shirt, the heavy cotton that had kept him warm through countless autumn nights, and wrapped it around her head to staunch the bleeding. He checked her spine as carefully as he could with hands more accustomed to reins and gun leather than medical examination. Nothing broken there, thank God. But her legs, her poor twisted legs. He made a decision in that moment, the kind of decision that changes everything that comes after. He could not leave her here. He could not wait for help that might never come. His ranch, Broken Creek, was 20 miles north through rough terrain, but it was shelter, warmth, safety, everything this child needed if she was going to survive. Cole lifted her into his arms as gently as if she were made of glass. She weighed almost nothing, this fragile scrap of humanity. Her head lolled against his massive chest, and he could feel her shallow breathing, feel the flutter of her heartbeat like a bird trapped in his hands. He settled her carefully across his saddle, then swung up behind her, cradling her against him as he turned his mare north. The journey to Broken Creek would take hours. Every step had to be calculated, every shift in the saddle measured, so as not to jar her broken body. Halfway through the ride, she woke. Her scream was weak, barely more than a whimper, but it spoke of agony beyond words. Her small hands clutched at his vest fingernails, digging into the leather as waves of pain washed through her. "Easy now, little one." Cole said, his voice a low rumble that he hoped sounded soothing rather than frightening. "You're safe. I got you. I won't let you fall." Her eyes focused on his face. For a moment she simply stared at him, at his wild beard silver-streaked with brown, at his weathered skin lined deep by sun and wind and sorrow, at his eyes, those brown-green eyes that had not looked kindly upon another human being in so very long. "Are you going to hurt me?" The question hit Cole like a physical blow. Hurt her. Dear God, what kind of life had this child lived, that her first thought upon being rescued was fear of more harm? "Hurt you, Lord, no, child. I'm taking you somewhere warm and safe, somewhere you can heal." Her lips trembled. Tears leaked from the corners of her eyes, cutting tracks through the dirt on her face. They all say that she whispered. Then her eyes rolled back and she slipped into unconsciousness again, her body going limp in his arms. They all say that. The words haunted Cole as he rode. What did that mean? Who were they? What had happened to this child before the stagecoach crash? Questions piled upon questions, but he pushed them aside. First things first, get her warm, get her safe. Then find answers. His cabin appeared through the mesquite trees as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon. Small and solid, built from logs he had cut and chinked himself 17 years ago when he first retreated from the world. It had been his fortress against grief, his refuge from pain and memory. Now its door stood open before him, ready to shelter this unexpected burden, this chance at something he had never asked for. Redemption. Cole kicked the door wider and carried the girl inside. The cabin's single room was dim and cold, the fire in the stone hearth long since burned to ashes. But it was shelter. It was safety. It was home. He laid her carefully on his rope bed, the only bed the mattress stuffed with prairie grass and old wool that crackled beneath her slight weight. She looked impossibly small there, impossibly fragile, a broken doll placed upon a giant's furniture. Cole moved with purpose, now his hands remembering tasks he thought he had forgotten. He built up the fire until flames leaped and danced, throwing golden light across the room and beginning to push back the cold. He set water to boil in his largest pot. He gathered clean cloth from his meager stores, tearing strips for bandages. The girl's breathing was shallow but steady. Her face had lost some of its deathly pallor now that she was out of the cold, but blood had soaked through the makeshift bandage on her head. Cole washed his hands thoroughly, scrubbing away dirt and blood with harsh lye soap, then turned his attention to her wounds. The head wound was not as bad as it looked. Head wounds always bled terribly. He cleaned it carefully, checking for fragments of wood or rock, finding none. 7 stitches closed it neatly, his thick fingers surprisingly deft with the needle. A skill learned during his ranger days, stitching up men after fights with Comanche raiders and Mexican bandits. But her legs. Cole examined them with a heavy heart. The left shin was clearly broken, the bone fractured, but thankfully not protruding through the skin. He splintered it with straight pieces of wood and strips of cloth, binding it carefully so the bone could knit properly. But worse than the break was the absolute stillness of both legs. When he pressed on her feet, her toes, her calves, there was no response, no reflexive twitch, no reaction at all. He had seen this before. Men crushed by falling timber, cowboys trampled in stampedes, the spine damaged, the connection severed between brain and limb. Some recovered, most did not. As he worked, his eyes fell upon the old trunk in the corner of the room, the trunk he had not opened in all those long years, the trunk that held the remnants of his former life. He stood slowly crossed to it and lifted the heavy lid. The smell of lavender and old wood rose up to greet him. Inside lay folded garments, a woman's shawl carefully preserved, a child's dress small enough for a 10-year-old, and a doll, a simple cloth doll with button eyes and yarn hair made by Catherine's hands for their daughter's 9th birthday, the last birthday Lily had ever seen. Cole lifted it gently, remembering Lily's face when she had first seen it, the way her eyes had lit up with pure joy. He carried the doll back to the bedside and placed it carefully beside the unconscious girl. She might want it when she woke. Every child deserved something to hold on to. Night fell while Cole kept his vigil. He made a simple stew from dried beef and wild onions, letting it simmer slowly over the fire. He checked the girl's bandages, her breathing, her pulse. He added more wood to the fire. He waited. Sometime near midnight, she stirred. Cole was dozing in his chair, his head nodding forward onto his chest, when a small sound brought him instantly alert. The girl's eyes were open, reflecting the firelight, wide and frightened. "Easy," he said softly, not moving from his chair, not wanting to frighten her. "You're safe here. You're in my cabin at Broken Creek Ranch. I found you in a stagecoach wreck down in the valley. Do you remember?" She blinked slowly. Her gaze moved around the room, taking in the rough log walls, the dancing firelight, the dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Then her eyes found the doll beside her. Her hand moved slowly, tentatively, until her fingers touched the worn cloth. "Rosie," she whispered. "That her name? Your doll's name?" She nodded, clutching the doll to her chest with both arms. Cole stood slowly and ladled stew into a wooden bowl. He approached the bed carefully as one might approach a wild animal and held out the bowl. "You like beef. It's all I got. Well, that and some beans older than you are." Sarah took a careful bite of the stew, chewed slowly, then looked up at Cole with those serious blue eyes. "I've eaten worse." Cole raised an eyebrow. "That bad, huh?" "No." Sarah said, the tiniest hint of a smile touching her lips. "I mean, in the past 4 years, this is actually good." Cole felt something warm in his chest, something that might have been the beginning of a laugh. "Well, I reckon that's the finest compliment my cooking's ever received." The smallest hint of something that might have been a smile touched her lips. She tried to sit up and gasped in pain, her face going white. "Your leg's broken," Cole said gently, "and your back is hurt. You need to stay still for now. Let me help you." He lifted her with infinite care, propping her against the wall with folded blankets behind her. Then he handed her the bowl and a spoon. She ate slowly, her hands shaking, but she ate. That was good. That meant she wanted to live. After she had eaten a few spoonfuls, she looked up at him, those blue eyes studying his face with an intensity that was unsettling in one so young. "You've done this before," she said. "Fixed broken bones long time ago. My daughter, she fell from a horse once. Had to set her arm. Where is she now?" The question was innocent. She could not have known how it would pierce him. Cole was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant howl of a coyote in the darkness outside. "Gone to heaven," he said finally. "Her and her mama both. Long time ago now. Year was 1869. Yellow fever took them both in the same week." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry. Me too, child. Me too." They sat in silence for a while. The girl finished half the bowl of stew before her strength gave out. Cole took it from her hands and set it aside. She was watching him again with that unnerving intensity. "What's your name, little one?" For a moment he thought she would not answer. Then so quietly he almost missed it. She said, "Sarah. Sarah Grace." "Sarah." Cole nodded. "That's a good name. A strong name. I'm Cole. Cole Brennan. Folks used to call me Ranger back when I wore the star. Are you really going to keep me safe?" Her voice was small and afraid and full of a desperate hope that broke his heart. "I am," Cole said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "I won't let anyone hurt you. That's a promise." "Promises can be broken," Sarah whispered. "Not this one," Cole said firmly. "Not this one." Sarah's eyes searched his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly and settled back against the blankets, still clutching the doll. Cole covered her with more blankets, making sure she was warm. As she drifted toward sleep, she spoke one more time. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." Cole felt something crack deep inside his chest, some wall he had built around his heart 17 years ago. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of blonde hair away from her face. "You're welcome, Sarah Grace." The next morning came with fingers of golden light reaching through the single window, touching the cabin's rough walls with the promise of a new day. Cole had not slept. He had spent the night in his chair by the fire watching Sarah breathe, listening to the small sounds she made in her sleep, alert to any change that might signal danger. Now, as dawn broke, he stood and stretched his frame, feeling every one of his 59 years in the stiffness of his joints. He moved quietly to the fire and built it up again, setting water to boil for coffee. The familiar rituals of morning felt different now. Changed. He was no longer cooking for one. Behind him, Sarah stirred. He heard the rustle of blankets, a small gasp of pain as she tried to move her legs, and remembered they would not obey. "They still won't work," she said flatly. It was not a question. "Not yet," Cole replied, turning to face her. "But bones heal, bodies mend. Give it time." Sarah looked at him with those old eyes in that young face. "Time doesn't fix everything, Mr. Brennan. Sometimes things just stay broken." The wisdom in her words, the bone-deep acceptance of loss, from one so young, told Cole more about her past than any interrogation could have. This child had learned hard lessons, had seen promises broken, had discovered that the world could be cruel beyond measure. "Maybe so," Cole said quietly, "but I've seen miracles too, seen men walk again who the doctor said never would. Don't give up hope yet, little one." Sarah nodded, but the hope in her eyes was fragile as spun glass. Cole brought her breakfast, simple fare of cornbread and bacon. As she ate, he noticed her eyes kept drifting to the door to the window, as if expecting someone to come crashing through at any moment. "You keep watching the door," Cole observed. "You expecting someone?" Sarah's hand trembled, the cornbread nearly slipping from her fingers. "Always expecting someone. They always come back." "Who, Sarah? Who comes back?" But she had retreated into silence again, that wall dropping down over her expression like a curtain. Cole did not push. Patience. Truth would come in its own time. After breakfast, Cole faced a dilemma. Sarah could not be left alone, not in her condition. But he needed supplies, more medical materials, proper food for a growing child. And most importantly, he needed to get word to someone about finding her. Surely people were looking for this child. Surely someone was searching. The answer was obvious. Dutch McKinley's general store in Redemption Springs, 15 miles south. Dutch was the only person Cole had maintained contact with over the years, the only thread connecting him to the world beyond his ranch. Dutch would know what to do. Dutch would help. "I need to take you into town," Cole said, "to a friend of mine who runs a store. He'll know how to help us find your family." Something flickered across Sarah's face. Fear, perhaps, or hope, or both tangled together until they could not be separated. "What if my family doesn't want me anymore?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "What if I'm too broken now?" Cole knelt beside the bed so he could look her in the eyes. "Listen to me, Sarah Grace. If your family is worth anything at all, they'll want you back more than they want their next breath. And if they don't, then they don't deserve you. But we have to try. We have to find them." Sarah clutched the cloth doll tighter. "Okay, I trust you." Those 3 words carried more weight than any oath sworn on a Bible. Cole felt their burden settle onto his shoulders like a physical thing. She trusted him. This broken child, who had every reason to trust no one, had placed her faith in a man she had known less than a day. He would not betray that trust. Not if it cost him everything he had. Sometimes, Cole thought, as he prepared for the journey to town, sometimes broken people are the only ones who can save other broken people. Because they know what pain feels like. They know what it costs to keep breathing when every breath hurts. They know that survival is its own kind of courage. And maybe, just maybe, that was why he had found Sarah Grace in that valley. Not by accident, not by chance, but because 2 broken souls were meant to find each other and learn that broken doesn't mean worthless. It means you survived something. And survival, Cole was beginning to remember, was just the beginning. The journey to Redemption Springs took most of the day. Cole fashioned a travois from mesquite branches and rope, creating a platform where Sarah could lie wrapped in blankets while his mare pulled her behind him. The terrain was unforgiving, the going slow, but Cole's strength had been legendary in these parts once, and he used every ounce of it now. They had been on the trail for 2 hours when Sarah spoke again, her voice cutting through the rhythmic creak of the travois and the steady clip of hooves on hard ground. "Mr. Brennan, can I ask you something? Anything, child? Do you have a gun I could learn to use?" Cole pulled his mare to a halt and turned in the saddle to look at her. Her face was pale but determined, those blue eyes clear and focused despite the pain he knew she must be feeling. "Why would you want to learn that?" "Because I can't run," Sarah said simply. I can't hide, but maybe I can fight. The logic was sound, heartbreaking, but sound. Cole dismounted and walked back to the travois. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small derringer no bigger than his palm. 2 shots. A close-range weapon meant for last resorts. This here is serious business, he said, kneeling beside her. Not a toy. You only point it at something you're willing to destroy. You understand. Sarah nodded solemnly. I understand. Over the next hour, as they rested the horse, Cole taught her the basics. How to check if it was loaded, how to hold it steady despite its weight, how to squeeze the trigger, not jerk it. Sarah absorbed it all with fierce concentration, asking questions that showed she understood not just the mechanics, but the responsibility. They were preparing to move on when Cole heard it, the distant sound of hooves, multiple horses moving fast. He grabbed his Winchester from the saddle scabbard and scanned the horizon. 3 riders appeared over the rise to the east, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. They rode hard, heading directly toward them. Cole's instincts, honed by years of danger, screamed warning. Sarah, he said quietly, get down low in the travois. Don't move. Don't make a sound. He moved to stand between her and the approaching rider's rifle held ready, but not yet raised. As they drew closer, Cole could make out details. Hard men, trail-worn, the kind who made their living with guns rather than honest work. They slowed as they approached, fanning out to surround him. Afternoon, stranger, the lead rider said. He was young, maybe 30, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. Saw your smoke this morning. Thought we'd ride over, see if you needed help. Don't need any help, Cole said evenly. Just passing through. The rider's eyes flicked to the travois, to the small form wrapped in blankets. That your daughter? My concern, not yours. The other 2 riders had circled around, positioning themselves at angles. Classic ambush formation. Cole's finger moved to the trigger guard of his Winchester. Thing is, the scarred man continued, we're looking for something. Or someone. Little girl. Blonde hair. About 8 years old. You seen anyone like that? No. The lie came easy. Natural. Because Cole knew in his bones what these men were, what they wanted, and they would have to kill him before they touched Sarah. See, that's funny, the rider said, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. Because we tracked a stagecoach wreck to a valley about 20 miles north, and we tracked a horse from that wreck to a ranch, and we tracked that ranch to this trail, so you'll forgive me if I don't quite believe you. The tension stretched tight as a bowstring. 4 heartbeats. 5. Then Sarah's voice, small but clear, cut through the silence. I know you. The scarred man's head whipped toward the travois. Sarah had pushed herself up on her elbows, staring at him with eyes that held recognition and terror in equal measure. You were there, Sarah said, her voice trembling but steady. 4 years ago, you held me down while he put the cloth over my face. You laughed when I cried. The scarred man's face went pale, then flushed with anger. Well, now he said, his gun clearing leather. Looks like we found our loose end. Cole's Winchester came up smooth and fast, the motion so practiced it seemed effortless. The crack of the rifle split the air before the scarred man's pistol had fully risen. The bullet took him in the right shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, screaming. The other 2 riders drew their guns, but Sarah's derringer barked twice, the shots wild, but close enough to make them flinch. In that moment of hesitation, Cole worked the Winchester's lever, chambered another round, and fired again. The second man's horse reared as the bullet whistled past, close enough to make the rider think twice about his choices. Your friend needs a doctor, Cole said, his rifle trained on the 3rd man. You can take him and ride out, or you can stay and we'll see this through. Your choice. The 3rd rider looked at his wounded companion, writhing in the dust, looked at the old man with the steady hands and cold eyes, looked at the little girl with the smoking pistol, and made his decision. He holstered his gun and dismounted slowly, hands visible. We're leaving, he said. Just leaving. They hauled the scarred man onto his horse, the wounded man cursing and bleeding, but alive. Within minutes they were riding east, pushing their horses hard, leaving nothing but dust and the sharp smell of gunpowder. Cole lowered his rifle and turned to Sarah. She was shaking the derringer still clutched in both hands, her eyes wide with shock at what she had just done. You did good, Sarah Cole said gently, taking the pistol from her trembling fingers. You stood up, you fought back. That takes courage. I was so scared, she whispered. Fear means you're alive. Courage means you fight anyway. He gathered her into his arms as she finally broke down, crying against his chest, releasing all the terror and pain and helplessness that had been building since the stagecoach crash. Cole held her and let her cry, one massive hand stroking her hair while his eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of the riders returning. They didn't. But Cole knew this was far from over. Those men had been looking for Sarah specifically, which meant someone had sent them. Someone who wanted her back, or wanted her silenced. As Sarah's sobs quieted, Cole made a decision. They would push on to Redemption Springs tonight, even if it meant riding in darkness. They needed allies. They needed the law. They needed help. But first they needed a moment to breathe. Cole built a small fire as the sun began to set, more for comfort than warmth. He made coffee strong enough to strip paint and sat beside the travois, the Winchester across his knees, watching the darkness gather. Sarah lay wrapped in blankets, staring at the first stars appearing in the vast Texas sky. The trauma of the day had exhausted her, but she seemed unwilling to sleep, as if afraid of what nightmares might come. "Mr. Brennan," she said softly, "do you ever sing 'Haven't in a long time'?" "Why, my mama used to sing to me, before. When I was scared she'd sing, and it made everything seem less dark." Cole was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice rough from disuse, but surprisingly gentle, he began to sing. An old song, one Catherine used to love. "Oh, give me a home where the buffalo roam, where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word, and the skies are not cloudy all day." Sarah's eyes drifted closed, her breathing beginning to slow. Cole continued, the words coming easier now, unlocking memories he had kept sealed away for so long. "Home, home on the range where the deer and the antelope play, where seldom is heard a discouraging word and the skies are not cloudy all day." By the time he finished, Sarah was asleep, her face peaceful for the first time since he had found her. Cole sat watching her, this child who had rekindled something in him he thought had died with Catherine and Lily. Purpose, the will to protect, the capacity to care. They reached Redemption Springs as the moon rose full and bright over the eastern plain. The town was a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a single dirt street, exactly as Cole remembered from his last visit 6 months prior. Dutch McKinley's general store stood at the center lamplight, glowing warm from its windows. Cole pulled up in front and called out, Dutch McKinley, it's Cole Brennan, I need help." The door swung open and Dutch appeared, a man of 62 with a beard gone completely white and eyes still sharp as a hawk's. His expression of surprise at seeing Cole transformed to shock when he saw Sarah on the travois. "Lord have mercy," Dutch breathed. "Cole, what have you found?" "A child who needs help," Cole said simply. "Her name's Sarah, and there are men hunting her." They carried Sarah inside, where Dutch's wife Martha fussed over her, immediately clucking like a mother hen as she examined the bandages and splint. The store's interior was cluttered with goods and supplies, everything a frontier town might need. Dutch cleared a space near the large pot-bellied stove and laid out blankets to make a nest for Sarah. As Martha tended to the girl, Dutch pulled Cole aside to a quiet corner. "Tell me everything," Dutch said. So Cole did. The stagecoach wreck, Sarah's injuries, the riders who had attacked them on the trail, Sarah's recognition of one of them, her claim that she had been taken 4 years ago. Dutch's face grew graver with each detail. When Cole finished, the older man was silent for a long moment, his fingers drumming on the counter the way they did when he was thinking hard. "Cole," Dutch said finally, "that girl's description matches something I heard about 3 months back. A man came through here, well-dressed, city type. Bought supplies for a long journey, rope, canvas, medicine, the kind of things you'd need for transporting cargo, or people," Cole said. Dutch nodded. "He was asking questions about trails through the valley, about which routes the stagecoaches took. I didn't think much of it then, but now. His name was Victor Crane." The name hung in the air between them like smoke. Cole filed it away, a name to remember, a name to hunt. "There's more," Dutch continued, his voice dropping even lower. 6 years back, my granddaughter went missing, Annie. She was 9 years old. One day she was playing in front of this very store, and the next she was gone, like she vanished into thin air. We searched for months, never found a trace." Cole saw the pain in his old friend's eyes, the wound that had never healed. "You think this Crane took her?" "I think," Dutch said carefully, "that a man who takes children isn't likely to take just one. I think Sarah might be part of something bigger. Something darker than either of us imagined." "Then we need the law," Cole said. "Federal law. This is bigger than a local sheriff can handle." "Agreed. I'll send a telegram first thing tomorrow morning. To San Antonio, to the family Sarah mentioned, to the U.S. Marshal's office in Fort Worth. We'll get help." "Tomorrow might be too late," Cole said, glancing toward Sarah, who was drinking hot chocolate. Martha had made her eyes still wary, but beginning to trust these kind strangers. "Then we keep her safe tonight," Dutch said firmly. You, me, and anyone else in this town who still believes in protecting children from evil men." As if summoned by the word evil, the door to the general store banged open. A young man stood there breathing hard, his face flushed from hard riding. "Mr. McKinley," he gasped. "Sir, you need to know. There are strangers in town. Just rode in. 8 of them. Hard-looking men. And they're asking about a little blonde girl." Cole's hand went to his Colt. "How long ago?" 10 minutes, maybe. They're at the saloon now." Dutch looked at Cole, then at Sarah, then back at Cole. Decisions made in moments like these determined everything that followed. "Get the word out," Dutch said to the young man. "Quiet-like. Tell Thomas Sullivan at the smithy. Tell Ezra at the livery. Tell Abigail Thornton. Tell anyone you trust. There's a child here who needs protecting, and we're going to protect her." The young man nodded and disappeared into the night. Dutch turned to Martha. "Take Sarah to the back room, the one with the reinforced door. Stay with her. Don't open it for anyone but me or Cole." Martha gathered Sarah without a word, wrapping her in blankets and carrying her toward the rear of the store. Sarah looked back at Cole, fear written plain on her small face. "It's all right, Sarah Grace," Cole called to her. "Remember what I taught you? Fear means you're alive. Courage means you fight anyway." Sarah nodded, clutching her doll Rosie, and disappeared with Martha through the door. Cole checked his Colts, then his Winchester. Dutch produced a shotgun from behind the counter, breaking it open to confirm it was loaded. "You know," Dutch said conversationally, "I thought my fighting days were behind me." Cole smiled grimly. "So did I, old friend. So did I." Outside, the Texas night was alive with the sound of approaching horses. Multiple riders moving slow and deliberate down the main street. Cole moved to the window and peered out through a gap in the curtains. 8 men on horseback. In the moonlight, Cole could make out their leader, a man in his mid-40s, well-dressed despite the trail dust. He sat his horse with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Even from this distance, Cole could see the coldness in his eyes. Victor Crane had come to Redemption Springs, and the real battle was about to begin. The 8 riders halted in the center of Main Street, their horses stamping and blowing in the cool night air. Lamplight from the saloon and general store cast long shadows across the dusty ground, turning men and horses into shapes that seemed larger than life, more menacing than reality. Victor Crane dismounted with the practiced ease of a man born to wealth and position. Even covered in trail dust, his bearing spoke of refinement. The dark suit, though worn from travel, had been expensive once. The bowler hat perched on his head was the kind you saw in cities like New York or Boston, not in frontier towns like Redemption Springs. He carried a walking stick with a silver handle, tapping it lightly against his palm as he surveyed the street with eyes the color of riverstone. Cold, calculating, patient. Cole watched him through the gap in the curtains, taking his measure the way a hunter sizes up dangerous prey. This was not some common outlaw or trail trash. This was a man who thought, who planned, who understood that power came not just from guns, but from knowing how to use them at exactly the right moment. Behind Crane, his men waited on their horses, hard cases all, the kind who hired out their guns and asked no questions about the work. But even they seemed uneasy, glancing at the darkened buildings around them, sensing that this quiet town held more than met the eye. Dutch moved to stand beside Cole, the shotgun held low but ready. "That's him," Dutch said quietly. "That's the man who came through 3 months back. Victor Crane." "He looks like a banker," Cole observed. "He was, once, before he became something worse." The door to the saloon swung open, and Sheriff Wade Hollister stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk. Even from a distance, Cole could see the man's soft middle, and the way his gun belt sat too tight around his expanding waist. Hollister was 52 and looked older, his face florid from too much whiskey and too little exercise. He wore a tin star, but it was tarnished much like the man himself. "Evening, gentlemen," Hollister called out, his voice carrying the false heartiness of a politician. "What brings you to Redemption Springs?" Crane turned to face the sheriff, and even that simple movement had a kind of theatrical quality to it, as if he were always aware of being watched, always performing. "Good evening, Sheriff. My name is Victor Crane. I am looking for my ward. A young girl, 8 years old, blonde hair, blue eyes. There was a stagecoach accident 2 days ago, and she has gone missing. I have reason to believe someone in this town may have found her." Hollister's eyes flickered toward the general store just for a moment, but it was enough. Cole saw it. Dutch saw it. And from the slight smile that touched Crane's lips, he saw it too. The sheriff had been bought. "I ain't heard nothing about no missing girl." Hollister said the lie coming easy to his tongue. "But if I do, I'll be sure to let you know." Crane studied the sheriff for a long moment, then reached into his coat and produced a leather wallet. He counted out bills, the paper crackling in the quiet night. $5, $10, $15, $20. More money than a frontier sheriff made in 2 months. I would appreciate any assistance you can provide, Crane said, handing over the money. The girl is precious to me. Family, you understand. Hollister pocketed the bills with practiced speed. Of course. Family's important. Inside the store, Cole felt his jaw tighten with fury. This was not justice. This was corruption, plain and simple. The very thing he had fought against during his years as a ranger, the thing that had made him give up the star in disgust and retreat to his ranch 17 years ago. We need to move, Cole said, before they come knocking. Dutch nodded and moved quickly to the back room. He returned moments later with Martha and Sarah. The girl looked smaller than ever, wrapped in blankets and clutching her doll, but her eyes were alert and watchful. Sarah, honey, Dutch said gently, kneeling beside her wheelchair, a sturdy contraption with wooden wheels that old Thomas the blacksmith had fashioned that very afternoon. There are some bad men outside. We need to take you somewhere safer, somewhere they won't think to look. The church, Martha suggested. Father Michael has that root cellar beneath the vestry. It was built during the Indian Wars, solid stone, only one way in, easy to defend. Cole considered this, a defensible position, good sight lines from the church tower, multiple exits if things went bad. It was sound tactical thinking, but before they could move, the sound of boots on the wooden sidewalk announced a visitor. The door to the general store swung open, and Victor Crane stepped inside alone and unarmed, his hands visible and empty. "Good evening," he said pleasantly, as if he were a customer come to buy flour and sugar. "I apologize for the late hour, but I am searching for someone very dear to me." Cole stepped forward, his hand resting on the Colt at his hip. "Store is closed." Crane's eyes moved past Cole to Sarah, and something flickered in their depths. Recognition. And beneath it, calculation. He took a step forward, and Cole's hand tightened on his gun. "My name is Victor Crane," the man said, still in that pleasant conversational tone. "And unless I am very much mistaken, that young lady is my ward, Sarah Hartford. Her parents, God rest their souls, perished in a fire 2 years ago. I have been her legal guardian ever since." He reached into his coat, slowly, carefully, and produced a folded document. He held it out for Cole to see. "You're lying," Sarah said, her voice clear and strong despite her fear. "My parents aren't dead. They live in San Antonio, 42 Mesquite Street, and you are not my guardian. You are the man who stole me from them." Crane's pleasant expression never wavered, but his eyes went cold as winter ice. "The child has been through a terrible trauma," he said smoothly. "The accident has confused her. She does not remember clearly." "I remember perfectly," Sarah said, and she pushed herself up straighter in her wheelchair, her small hands gripping the armrests. "I remember the night 4 years ago when you and your men came to our house. I remember the sweet smell of the cloth you put over my face. I remember waking up in a dark room and crying for my mama. I remember every day of the 4 years you kept me locked away. And I remember the stagecoach crash when you decided I was no longer worth keeping alive." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the street outside had gone quiet, as if the whole town were holding its breath. Crane's mask slipped, just for a moment. The pleasant facade cracked, and beneath it Cole saw something ugly, something desperate. "You have no idea what you are interfering with," Crane said, his voice still quiet but no longer pleasant. "This child is damaged goods, broken, of no use to anyone. But she can still cause considerable trouble if she continues to tell her lies." "Not lies," Dutch said, stepping forward with his shotgun. "The truth. And we aim to protect it, and her." Crane looked around the room, taking in Cole, Dutch, Martha. His eyes lingered on each of them, measuring, calculating. Then he smiled, and it was a terrible thing to see. "You are making a grave mistake," he said. "All of you." He turned and walked out into the night, his walking stick tapping on the wooden floor with each step. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Cole moved immediately to the window. Outside, Crane was speaking with his men, gesturing toward the store. Then he mounted his horse, and the group rode slowly down the street toward the hotel, their shadows long in the lamplight. "He'll be back," Cole said, "and next time he won't come alone. Then we need to be ready," Dutch replied. He turned to Martha. "Get the word out, the signal we discussed. Anyone who's willing to stand with us needs to know what we're facing." Martha nodded and slipped out the back door, moving quickly through the darkness toward the homes of those they trusted. Within the hour, people began arriving at the general store through the back entrance. They came quietly in ones and twos, their faces grim but determined. Thomas Sullivan was first, the blacksmith's massive frame filling the doorway. He He was 55, with arms like tree trunks and hands scarred from decades of working hot metal. He carried a rifle and a look of righteous anger. My boy was killed by men like Crane, Thomas said without preamble. Outlaws who thought they could take what they wanted. I won't stand by while another child suffers. Ezra Yates came next, the livery stable owner who had served as a Buffalo soldier in the cavalry. At 48, he still moved with military precision, his rifle held with the ease of a man who knew how to use it. His dark skin was weathered by sun and wind, his eyes sharp and alert. I've seen evil in my time, Ezra said quietly, fought against it in uniform. I can fight it now without one. Abigail Thornton arrived with 12 women, all of them carrying notebooks and pens instead of weapons. The schoolteacher was 52, gray-haired and stern-faced, with the bearing of someone accustomed to maintaining order in chaos. We cannot fight with guns, Abigail announced to the room. But we can fight with testimony. We can bear witness. We can write down everything that happens here tonight, so that if Crane wins by force, he cannot win by lies. History will know the truth. Dutch led them all down to the store's basement, a large space that smelled of earth and stored goods. Oil lamps were lit, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. A map of the town was spread on a makeshift table. Here's what we know, Dutch began. Victor Crane is not just a kidnapper. He's running a network. My granddaughter Annie went missing 6 years ago. Sarah was taken 4 years ago. There are likely others. How many men does he have? Thomas asked. 8, that we've seen, Cole answered. Plus Sheriff Hollister, who's been bought. That makes 9. And we have Ezra queried. Cole counted on his fingers. Myself, Dutch, Thomas, Ezra. That's 4 men who can shoot, plus the ladies as witnesses, 5 men, a voice said from the doorway. A younger man stood there, perhaps 32, with the lean build of someone who had lived hard and the haunted eyes of someone carrying regrets. Jack Morrow. I heard what's happening. I want in. Dutch frowned. Morrow, you're a hired gun. Why should we trust you? Jack's jaw tightened. Because 2 years ago I shot a homesteader over a land dispute. Did it for money. Never asked if the man deserved it. Turned out he didn't. He had a daughter, 8 years old. Blonde hair, like that little girl upstairs. I see her in my dreams every night. I can't bring that man back. But maybe I can make sure no other child ends up an orphan because men like me don't ask enough questions. The room was silent. Then Cole spoke. Can you shoot? Yes, sir. Will you follow orders? Yes, sir. Then you're in. But Jack, if you betray us, I will put you in the ground myself. Jack nodded. Understood. Thomas had moved to his portable forge, a small setup he used for emergency repairs. He was heating metal, shaping it with quick practiced blows of his hammer. The rhythmic clang filled the basement. Making reinforced brackets for the doors, he explained between strikes. Crane's men get past us. These will slow them down long enough for you to get Sarah out. His hammer came down hard and the hot metal sparked. In his haste, Thomas shifted his grip and the hammer slipped, glancing off the anvil and striking his boot with a solid thunk. Son of a biscuit eater, Thomas yelped, hopping on one foot and shaking the other. Consarn it all to blazes and back. Despite the tension, several people chuckled. Even Sarah, watching from her wheelchair in the corner, smiled slightly. Language, Thomas, Abigail chided, but her eyes were twinkling. There are children and ladies present. Thomas grinned sheepishly, rubbing his bruised toe. My apologies, Miss Thornton. This old blacksmith forgets his manners sometimes. The moment of levity passed, but it had served its purpose. The fear in the room had lessened, replaced by something stronger. Camaraderie, unity, the knowledge that they were not alone in this fight. Ezra cleared his throat. There's something you all should know. About Crane. I asked around, did some digging. Turns out he used to be somebody. A banker in New York. Had a family. Wife and daughter. What happened? Dutch asked. The panic of 1873, Ezra said. Financial collapse. Banks failed all across the country. Crane lost everything. His daughter got sick. Tuberculosis. He couldn't afford the medicine. The girl died. She was 7 years old. Name was Anna. The room went quiet. Cole felt something shift in his understanding of the man they faced. His wife Martha asked softly. Killed herself, Ezra said. Grief, they said. Couldn't live with losing her daughter. Crane found her body. After that, he disappeared. Next anyone heard of him, he was out west running some kind of operation. Turns out it was this. Taking children from wealthy families, ransoming them back, or selling them to families who couldn't have children of their own. He thinks he's evening the scales, Cole said quietly. Taking from the rich. Giving to those who have nothing. Dutch shook his head. That doesn't make it right. No, Cole agreed. It makes it tragedy. But tragedy doesn't excuse evil. That man lost his daughter, so he steals other people's daughters. He couldn't save Anna, so he destroys families like his own was destroyed. That's not justice. That's just pain, spreading itself around. Quotable wisdom, Abigail murmured, writing it down. She looked up at Cole. You should have been a preacher, Mr. Brennan. Cole smiled grimly. I've seen too much of hell to preach about heaven, ma'am. The planning continued into the small hours of the morning. Positions were assigned, signals established, escape routes mapped. The women set up their witness station in the church tower where they would have a clear view of Main Street and could document everything that happened. As the meeting broke up and people dispersed to their positions, Sarah called Cole over to her wheelchair. Mr. Brennan, she said quietly, are we going to win? Cole knelt beside her, looking into those two old eyes and that too young face. I don't know, Sarah Grace. I honest don't know, but I do know this. Sometimes you fight not because you know you'll win, but because it's the right thing to do. Sometimes standing up to evil is more important than victory. Because even if we fall knowing we tried. And that matters. Sarah reached out and took his weathered hand in her small one. Then I'm not afraid anymore, she said. Because whatever happens, I'm not alone. And that's more than I've had in 4 years. Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion. He squeezed her hand gently. You'll never be alone again, little one. That's a promise. And I keep my promises. Outside, the Texas night was deep and still, but in that stillness, men were moving, taking positions, loading guns, preparing for dawn. And somewhere in the hotel, Victor Crane was making his own preparations, driven by a twisted sense of justice born from unbearable loss. 2 broken men, 2 different choices. One had chosen to retreat from the world, the other had chosen to break it further. Tomorrow would determine which choice was stronger. The hotel room was Spartan but clean, the kind of temporary lodging that frontier towns offered to travelers who had money but no permanence. No. A single oil lamp burned on the dresser, casting amber light across peeling wallpaper and worn floorboards. Victor Crane sat in a straight-backed chair by the window, looking out at the darkened street below, his reflection ghostly in the glass. He had removed his coat and bowler hat, but even in shirt sleeves he maintained an air of rigid formality, as if relaxation were a luxury he could no longer afford. On the dresser beside the lamp sat a daguerreotype in a tarnished silver frame. A young girl, perhaps 7 years old, smiled out from the image with the innocent joy of a child who had never known hardship. Blonde ringlets framed a cherubic face. Her hand rested on a book staged that way by the photographer to suggest learning and refinement. Anna Crane, dead 11 years now, to grow into the woman she might have become. Crane reached out and touched the frame with fingers that trembled slightly. Then he opened the drawer beneath and withdrew a letter, the paper yellowed with age, the creases worn soft from countless readings. The handwriting was childish but careful, each letter formed with the concentration of someone just learning to master the written word. Dear Papa, the letter began. I know you are sad because we are poor now. I heard you and Mama talking last night when you thought I was asleep. But Papa, I don't mind being poor. I would rather have bread and water with you than cake and candy without you. Money doesn't make a family. Love does. Please don't be sad anymore. Your loving daughter, Anna. She had written it 2 weeks before the tuberculosis took her, 2 weeks before Crane had watched his little girl drown in her own lungs, coughing blood while he held her hand and begged God for a mercy that never came. 2 weeks before he learned that in America, in the land of plenty, children died not from fate, but from poverty. From the simple lack of money to buy medicine that existed, but remained out of reach for those who could not pay. The doctors had been very clear. With proper treatment with the expensive drugs from Europe, Anna could have lived. But the panic of 1873 had destroyed the Crane family fortune. The bank had failed. Victor's investments had evaporated like morning dew. And so his daughter had died while wealthy men's children lived simply because their fathers had been luckier or smarter or more ruthless with money. The unfairness of it had broken something fundamental in Victor Crane's soul. His wife, Margaret, had lasted 6 months after Anna's death before she walked into the Hudson River one winter morning and did not walk out again. The note she left was brief. I cannot live in a world without her. Forgive me. Victor had not forgiven. Not her. Not God. Not the wealthy men whose children thrived while his had perished. And most of all, not himself. So he had become someone new. Someone who would correct the cosmic injustice that had taken his daughter. He would redistribute children from families who had too much to families who had nothing. From the wealthy who did not deserve their blessings to the childless who yearned for what he had lost. In his twisted logic, he was performing a service, balancing the scales that God or fate or random chance had left so terribly unbalanced. 12 children over 8 years. Some ransomed back to their families when money was paid. Others sold to couples who asked no questions and paid in gold. Victor told himself he was creating families, giving joy to those who had none, taking from those who could afford the loss. But Sarah Hartford had been a mistake. He had meant to take the governor's daughter traveling on the same stagecoach through Texas, 8 years old, blonde, worth a fortune, in ransom. But his men had grabbed the wrong girl in the chaos of the ambush. By the time Victor realized the error, it was too late. Sarah's father was just a poor preacher with no money for ransom, worthless as a commodity. Then the stagecoach accident, Sarah's injuries, the paralyzed legs that made her unsellable even to couples desperate for a child. She had become a liability instead of an asset, a witness who could identify him, a loose end that needed to be tied up permanently. Victor had given the order to dispose of her quietly, and his men had failed. Now she was here in this insignificant town under the protection of men who did not understand what they were interfering with, men who thought they were saving one child, who could not see the larger picture, the dozens of families Victor had helped, the childless couples who now had sons and daughters to love, the greater good that required occasional sacrifices. A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Victor carefully folded Anna's letter and returned it to the drawer, then placed the daguerreotype face down before calling out, "Enter!" Sheriff Hollister stepped inside, his bulk filling the doorway. The man's face was flushed, whether from exertion or drink, Victor could not tell, probably both. "We got a problem," Hollister said without preamble. "People are gathering. At the church. Dutch McKinley, that blacksmith Sullivan Ezra from the livery, maybe 15-20 people total?" Victor's expression did not change. "Let them gather. Sheep huddle together when they sense the wolf. It does not make them less sheep." "These sheep got teeth," Hollister said nervously. "I counted at least 5 rifles. And that old man with the girl, the one who brought her in, that's Cole Brennan." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Should that name mean something to me? Used to be a Texas Ranger, 20 years back, maybe more, before he retired and went to ground. Word was, he was the best they had. Fast with a gun, faster with his mind. If he's protecting that girl, this won't be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," Victor said calmly. He crossed to his coat and withdrew another stack of bills. "This is $300, Sheriff, more than you make in a year. It is yours if you ensure that your badge remains in your pocket tomorrow, that you see nothing, hear nothing, and remember nothing when this is finished." Hollister stared at the money, his internal struggle visible on his florid face. $300 was a fortune, enough to buy a farm, to retire, to drink himself to death in comfort instead of having to work for the privilege. The man took the money. "I don't want anyone killed." Hollister said the words sounding hollow even to his own ears. "Not if it can be helped." Victor smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Of course not, Sheriff. I am a businessman, not a murderer. I simply want to recover my ward and leave your town in peace. What happens after that is beyond your concern." Hollister nodded and left his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Victor stood alone in the room once more, looking down at Anna's photograph lying face down on the dresser. "I do this for you," he whispered to the image he could not see, "to make the world more fair, to ensure no other father watches his daughter die for lack of money." But even as he said it, some small part of him, the part that still remembered being Victor Crane, the father, instead of Victor Crane the criminal, whispered that this was a lie. That he did this not for justice, but for vengeance. Not to heal the world, but to make it hurt the way he hurt. He silenced that voice the way he had silenced it 1,000 times before. Then he turned to the window and began planning tomorrow's assault. Across town in the basement of the general store, Cole was teaching Sarah things no 8-year-old should need to know. He had laid out the contents of his possible bag on a wooden table. Matches, a compass, a small knife, a whistle. Dried beef wrapped in cloth, a canteen, everything she might need if the worst happened and she had to run. "Listen close," Sarah Grace Cole said, his voice firm but gentle. "If things go bad tomorrow, if they get past us and you're alone, you need to know how to survive." Sarah sat in her wheelchair, leaning forward, absorbing every word with fierce concentration. "First thing," Cole continued, "is direction. See this?" He held up the compass. "The needle always points north. If you have to run, go north. 20 miles north is my ranch. Broken Creek. You find that you'll find shelter, food, safety." "But I can't walk," Sarah said. "Then you crawl. You drag yourself. You do whatever it takes. Because giving up is the only way you truly lose." He showed her how to read the compass, how to use the sun, if she lost it, how to follow the North Star at night. Then he taught her about the whistle. 3 short blasts means danger. 2 long blasts means safe. 1 long blast means help needed. You remember that Sarah nodded, taking the whistle and practicing the patterns. The shrill sound echoed in the basement until Martha called down, asking if someone was killing a chicken. Despite everything, Cole smiled. Good, you got it. Now this knife. He unfolded a small pocket knife, the blade no longer than his thumb. This is for cutting rope or opening tins, not for fighting. You understand, if a man gets close enough for you to use this knife, you've already lost. Better to run, hide, or use that derringer I gave you. Sarah took the knife, testing its weight. Her hands were steadier now than they had been even a day ago. Fear was being replaced by determination. Helplessness by agency. "Mr. Brennan," she said quietly, "why are you doing all this, teaching me to survive without you?" "Because I'm 59 years old, Sarah. I've been shot twice, stabbed once, and fell off a horse more times than I can count. Tomorrow, I might not be fast enough or strong enough or lucky enough, and if that happens, I need to know that you can save yourself." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she did not let them fall. "I don't want you to die for me." Cole knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her small hands in his scarred, weathered ones. "Listen to me, child. I've been dead for 17 years, just breathing, not living. You gave me something back. Purpose. A reason to care. If I die tomorrow protecting you, I die having lived again. That's more than I had any right to hope for." "You're not going to die," Sarah said fiercely. "I won't let you." Cole laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Well, then I guess I better not. Can't disappoint you now, can I?" A voice called from the top of the stairs. "Cole. Sarah, you should come see this." They made their way up to find Dutch standing at the window, looking out at the street. Cole joined him, and his breath caught. The church across the street was lit up like a beacon, every window glowing with lamplight. And in front of it, gathered in the street, stood what looked like half the town. Men, women, even a few older children. They stood quiet and determined, holding lanterns, their faces set with resolve. Abigail Thornton stood at the front of the group, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her schoolteacher's posture making her seem taller than her 5 feet 4 inches. When she saw Cole and Sarah in the window of the general store, she raised her hand in a gesture that was part wave, part salute. "What's this?" Cole asked. Dutch's voice was thick with emotion. "This is what happens when good people decide they've had enough, when they choose to stand." Cole counted quickly. At least 30 people. More than he had expected, more than he had dared hope for. Martha opened the door, and Abigail entered with 3 others. A man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a clerical collar. A woman about 40 with the calloused hands of a farm wife. A young couple barely 20 holding hands. Cole Brennan. Abigail said formally, "I want you to meet some people. This is Father Michael from our church. This is Constance Bailey, whose farm is 10 miles south. And this is John and Emma Whitfield. They were married last month." "Pleased to meet you all," Cole said, confused about why he was being introduced. Father Michael stepped forward. "Mr. Brennan, we have heard what is happening. We have heard about young Sarah and the evil men who hunt her. We are here to say that we stand with you, all of us." Constance Bailey spoke next, her voice rough from years of shouting at livestock. "My husband died 3 years back. Left me alone with a farm and no children to help work it. I may not be able to fight with guns, but I can cook, and I can bear witness, and I can stand in the street tomorrow and say that what is happening here is wrong." John Whitfield cleared his throat nervously. "Emma and I, we don't have much, but we have each other, and we have faith that good people should protect children. We'll do whatever you need." Sarah pushed her wheelchair forward, looking up at these strangers who were willing to risk everything for a girl they had never met. "Why?" she asked simply. "You don't know me." Abigail knelt beside the wheelchair, her stern face softening. "Child, we don't have to know you personally to know that you deserve protection. Every child does. And if we stand by and let evil men take what they want because we're afraid, then we become part of the evil. We become the reason it continues." She looked around at the others, then back at Sarah. "We are teachers and farmers and shopkeepers and preachers. We are ordinary people. But ordinary people standing together become something extraordinary. We become a wall that evil cannot pass." The room was silent except for the soft sound of Sarah crying. Not tears of fear this time, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. These people barely knew her, yet they stood ready to face armed men on her behalf. Cole felt his own throat tighten. He had spent 17 years believing that the world was cruel and indifferent, that good people were rare and powerless, that one man alone could make no difference. He had been wrong. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "All of you. This means more than you know." Dutch stepped forward, unfolding a map on the table. "Then let's make sure we're ready. Abigail, your witnesses will be in the church tower with clear view of the street." Bow. "Father Michael, the church itself becomes a sanctuary if we need to evacuate Sarah. Constance, you and the other women prepare food and medical supplies. We may need both before this is over. John Emma, you'll be runners. If we need to send messages between positions, you're fastest and least likely to be stopped." The planning continued, each person given a role, each role essential to the whole. And watching them work together, seeing the determination on their faces, Cole felt something he had not felt in 17 years. Hope, not the naive hope of youth that believed everything would turn out right, but the hard-won hope of experience that knew evil could be fought, that good people united by common purpose were stronger than any individual corruption. Sarah looked up at Cole and smiled through her tears. "We're going to win, aren't we?" Cole returned the smile. "Maybe not win, but we're going to fight." And sometimes Sarah Grace fighting for what's right is its own kind of victory. Outside, the Texas night deepened toward the darkest hours before dawn. In the hotel, Victor Crane cleaned his pistol and prepared for battle. In the church and store and homes throughout Redemption Springs, ordinary people made ready to become heroes. And in the center of it all, a 8-year-old girl who had been told she was worthless discovered that she was worth an entire town standing up to evil. The storm was gathering, but so was the light. Dawn broke over Redemption Springs with fingers of pale gold reaching across the eastern sky, painting the wooden buildings in shades of amber and rose. It was the kind of morning that promised beauty, the air crisp and clean, carrying the scent of mesquite smoke from breakfast fires and the distant perfume of wild sage from the prairie beyond town. The kind of morning when the world seemed new and full of possibility. But Main Street told a different story. The street was empty, swept clean by an overnight wind that had erased all footprints and wagon tracks, leaving only virgin dust that would soon record the day's violence or deliverance. Shop windows were dark. Doors were barred. The saloon stood silent, its usual morning business of coffee and gossip suspended by the tension that hung over the town like a gathering thunderstorm. Cole stood at the window of the general store, his Winchester rifle cradled in his arms, watching the eastern horizon lighten by degrees. He had not slept. None of them had. The night had been spent in final preparations, in checking weapons and fortifying positions, in saying things that needed to be said in case there was no tomorrow to say them. Behind him, Sarah slept fitfully in her wheelchair, wrapped in blankets, her breathing soft and even, despite the nightmares that occasionally made her whimper and clutch her doll tighter. Dutch sat nearby, his shotgun across his knees, keeping watch over the girl with the tenderness of a grandfather protecting his own blood. The sound of hooves broke the morning stillness. They came from the east, silhouetted against the rising sun, 10 riders moving at a walk down the center of Main Street. The center of Main Street with the confidence of men who believed themselves untouchable. Victor Crane led them, sitting tall in his saddle, his dark suit and bowler hat making him look like a preacher or an undertaker. Either comparison seemed fitting. Behind him rode his 8 hired guns, hard men with cold eyes and well-worn pistols. And beside Crane, looking uncomfortable but committed to his corruption, rode Sheriff Wade Hollister, his tin star catching the early light like a beacon of failed justice. They halted 50 yards from the general store, spreading out in a loose line across the width of the street. Crane dismounted with his usual theatrical grace, brushing dust from his coat before stepping forward another 10 paces. "Good morning," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I apologize for the early hour, but I have business to conclude in this town. I will make this simple and clear so there can be no misunderstanding." Cole pushed open the door and stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk, his rifle held ready but not aimed. Dutch emerged beside him, followed by Thomas Sullivan and Ezra Yates, 4 men against 9. The odds were poor, but Cole had faced worse during his ranger days. "State your business," Cole said flatly. Crane smiled, and it was the smile of a man who held all the cards and knew it. "My business is simple. I want the girl. Sarah Hartford. She is my legal ward as documented by papers I have shown you. I am prepared to leave this town peacefully if she is returned to me. No violence, no trouble. You all go back to your lives and I go back to mine." "Over my dead body," Cole said. Crane's smile did not waver. "That can be arranged, Mr. Brennan. But is it necessary? Is one child worth dying for? Is she worth the destruction of this entire town?" He gestured broadly at the buildings around them. "Because make no mistake, gentlemen, if I do not have that girl by sunset today, Redemption Springs will burn. Every building, every home, every business. I have the men, I have the resources, and I have absolutely nothing left to lose. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Cole felt rage building in his chest, the old Ranger fury that had made him legendary and dangerous in equal measure. But before he could respond, Dutch stepped forward. Crane Dutch said, his voice shaking with barely controlled emotion. 6 years ago, my granddaughter disappeared, Annie McKinley. She was 9 years old, playing right there in front of this store. And then she was gone, like she vanished into thin air. Crane's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or calculation. You took her, Dutch continued. I know you did. Tell me where she is. Tell me if she's alive. Tell me that, and maybe we can talk. For a long moment, Crane was silent. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost gentle. Mr. McKinley, I am a businessman. I deal in commodities. I do not remember individual products any more than a cattle rancher remembers individual cows. If your granddaughter passed through my organization, she went to a family who wanted her, who paid for her, who would give her things you could not afford. Is that not better than poverty? Better than struggling on the edge of survival in a dying town? She had a family. Dutch said, his voice breaking. She had me. She had love. You don't buy that. You don't sell it. You stole it. Crane shrugged the gesture, eloquent in its indifference. Sentiment is a luxury of the wealthy Mr. McKinley. The poor cannot afford such foolishness. Before Dutch could respond, the church bell began to toll. Not the usual rhythm of calling people to worship, but a steady, insistent ringing that echoed across the town. One bell. Then another joined it from the schoolhouse. Then a third from the livery stable. The sound built and swelled until it seemed to fill the entire valley, a clarion call that could not be ignored. And the people of Redemption Springs answered. They emerged from buildings and homes, from hiding places and defensive positions. They came out into the morning light unarmed but unafraid, and they filled the street behind Cole and Dutch and the others, men and women, young and old, farmers and shopkeepers, the teacher and the preacher, the blacksmith's wife and the doctor's widow. 30 people, then 40, then 50. A wall of humanity standing together, standing firm, standing witness to what was happening in their town. Abigail Thornton walked to the front of the crowd, her gray hair pulled back, her schoolteacher's posture radiating authority and moral certainty. Mr. Crane, she said, her voice carrying across the street with practiced ease, you have made a mistake. You thought this was about one child and a handful of men willing to protect her, but you were wrong. This is about a community, about people who have decided that enough is enough. She gestured to the crowd behind her. We are witnesses, every one of us, and we will not be silent. We will not look away. We will not pretend we did not see what happens here today. You may have guns and money and corrupt officials, but we have the truth, and we will shout it from every rooftop until the world hears. Crane's confident demeanor cracked slightly. He looked at the crowd, measuring them, calculating whether his 9 guns could intimidate 50 unarmed citizens. His hand moved toward his pistol, and then Sarah appeared. The door to the general store opened, and Martha wheeled Sarah out onto the sidewalk. The little girl had insisted on coming, had refused to hide while others stood in her defense. She looked impossibly small in her wheelchair, fragile as spun glass, her blonde hair catching the morning light like a halo. But when she spoke, her voice was strong and clear and filled with a courage that shamed grown men. My name is Sarah Grace Hartford, she said, and the crowd fell silent to hear her. My father is Reverend Michael Hartford of San Antonio, Texas. My mother is Elizabeth Hartford. We lived at 42 Mesquite Street. I remember the flowers my mother planted in the garden. I remember my father's sermons on Sunday mornings. I remember being loved. She paused, gathering strength. 4 years ago, this man and his associates came to our home in the night. They put a sweet-smelling cloth over my face and took me. They locked me in dark rooms. They moved me from place to place. They told me my parents were dead. But I wasn't supposed to be there. My friend Margaret, the governor's daughter, was visiting. We were wearing each other's clothes, playing dress-up. Same blonde hair, same age. In the dark they grabbed me, thinking I was her. By the time they realized it was too late. I heard one say, wrong girl, preacher's kid worthless for ransom. I wasn't even the right child to steal. They told me I was worthless. They told me no one would ever want a broken child. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice never wavered. But Mr. Brennan taught me something. He taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless, that scars mean survival, that speaking truth requires more courage than staying silent. She looked directly at Crane, and in that moment she seemed older than her years, ancient with the wisdom of suffering endured and overcome. I am not your property, she said. I am not your loose end. I am a human being. I have a name. I have a family. I have worth. And I will not go with you. I would rather die right here, right now, in front of all these witnesses, than spend one more day as your prisoner." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then one of Crane's hired guns, a weathered man with gray in his beard, slowly dismounted. He looked at Sarah, then at Crane, then back at Sarah. He dropped his pistol in the dust. "I signed up to retrieve a runaway," the man said. "Not to murder a crippled child in front of a town full of witnesses. I'm out." He walked his horse past Crane and rode away down the street, his back straight, his decision made. Two more men followed their guns, joining the first in the dust of Main Street. Crane's face had gone pale, then flushed with fury. His hand clutched the handle of his walking stick so hard, his knuckles went white. "You are making a terrible mistake," he hissed. "All of you. You think you can stand against me with your speeches and your sentiment. You think justice matters. You think right makes might. I will teach you otherwise." He remounted his horse and turned to face the town. "You have until sunset," he said, his voice cold as winter. "Give me the girl or this town burns. Every building, every home. Think about that. Think about what you're willing to sacrifice for one broken child who means nothing to you." He wheeled his horse and rode back toward the hotel, his remaining men following. 7 remained: Crane, 5 hired guns, and Hollister. Better odds, but still dangerous, still deadly. The crowd began to disperse, returning to their homes and positions. But the atmosphere had changed. What had been fear was now determination. What had been doubt was now resolve. Cole turned to find Sarah looking up at him, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes bright with something that might have been hope. "Did I do all right?" she asked quietly. Cole knelt beside her wheelchair and pulled her into a gentle embrace. "You did more than all right, Sarah Grace. You showed them what courage looks like. You reminded us all why we fight." The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Thomas Sullivan worked his portable forge, creating iron brackets to reinforce doors and shutters. The sound of his hammer rang out like a heartbeat, steady and strong. At one point in his haste to finish a bracket before the metal cooled, Thomas shifted his grip awkwardly. The hammer slipped and came down hard on his thumb instead of the anvil. Jumping Jehoshaphat, Thomas yelped, shaking his hand, and dancing in a circle. "Concerned piece of blasted ironwork. May it rust in eternal damnation and be used to shoe the devil's own horse." Despite the tension, several people laughed. Even Thomas grinned sheepishly through the pain, wrapping his bruised thumb in a rag and returning to work. Ezra Yates prepared the horses, selecting the fastest and strongest for a potential escape. He showed Cole 3 different routes out of town, each one leading to defensible ground or allies who could be trusted. "If it goes bad," Ezra said quietly, "you take Sarah and ride north. Don't stop. Don't look back. My cousin has a ranch 30 miles that direction. He'll hide you until the marshal can get here." Cole nodded, committing the route to memory. But he had no intention of running. He had run once before, 17 years ago, retreating to his ranch to hide from grief and responsibility. He would not run again. As the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, Abigail Thornton and her witnesses set up their station in the church tower. They had notebooks and pens prepared to document everything that happened in the street below. History would know the truth of this day, regardless of who won the coming battle. In a quiet corner of the general store, Martha McKinley sat with Sarah, brushing the girl's hair with long, gentle strokes. It was a simple act of nurturing, the kind of thing mothers did for daughters, and it brought a peacefulness to Sarah's face that had been absent for so long. "You have beautiful hair," Martha said softly, "like spun gold." "My mama used to brush it," Sarah whispered. "Every night before bed. She would sing while she did it. I can still hear her voice sometimes when I'm very quiet." Martha's eyes filled with tears, but she kept brushing, kept the rhythm steady and soothing. "What did she sing?" "Yellow Rose of Texas," Sarah said. "And sometimes Home on the Range, songs about wide open spaces and freedom." Martha began to hum and then to sing softly. The words of Home on the Range filled the small space, achingly beautiful in their simplicity. Sarah's eyes drifted closed, and for a moment she was not a child who had been stolen and broken and hunted. She was just a little girl being loved by someone who cared. When the song ended, Sarah opened her eyes and looked up at Martha. "If something happens today," she said quietly, "if the bad men win, will you tell my real mama something for me?" Martha's hands stilled on the brush. "Nothing is going to happen, sweetheart. We won't let it." "But if it does," Sarah insisted, "tell her I never forgot her. Tell her I said my prayers every night, even when I thought no one was listening. Tell her I tried to be brave." Martha set down the brush and gathered Sarah into her arms, holding her close. "I will tell her," she promised, "but you will tell her yourself, because you are going to survive this. You're going to go home, and you're going to live a long and beautiful life." "How can you be sure?" Sarah asked. "Because Martha said fiercely, 'Good people are standing between you and evil. And good people don't give up. We don't surrender. We fight until there's nothing left to fight with, and then we fight with our bare hands and our last breaths. That's what good people do." Sarah nodded and settled back against Martha's shoulder, drawing comfort from the older woman's certainty, even as fear continued to gnaw at her heart. As evening approached, Cole found himself alone with Sarah for a few moments, while the others made final preparations. He sat on a crate beside her wheelchair, his rifle propped against the wall, his weathered hands clasped together. "Mr. Brennan," Sarah said softly, "are you afraid?" Cole considered lying, considered giving her false comfort. But Sarah deserved truth. She had earned it through her own courage. "Yes," he said. "I'm afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of not being fast enough or strong enough. Afraid of losing you after just finding you." Sarah reached out and took his hand in both of hers. "But you taught me that fear means you're alive, that courage means you fight anyway." Cole smiled, surprised and humbled to hear his own words reflected back at him by this extraordinary child. "You're right. I did say that, and I meant it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the light fade from the windows as the sun descended toward the western horizon. "Mr. Brennan," Sarah said, "if we survive this, if we win, what happens next?" Cole looked at her, at this little girl, who had somehow become the center of his universe in the space of a few short days. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to go home," Sarah said, "to San Antonio, to my real mama and papa. But I also want you to come with me. I want you to be part of my family. Not instead of my parents, but in addition to them." "Is that allowed?" Cole felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I reckon it's allowed if everyone agrees. But Sarah, I'm just an old cowboy. What use would I be in a city?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "You would be my Papa Bear, the one who taught me to be brave, the one who showed me I have worth. That's not nothing, Mr. Brennan. That's everything." Before Cole could respond, Dutch called from the front of the store. "Cole, you need to see this." Cole stood and moved to the window. In the distance, the sun was touching the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and purple, beautiful and terrible at once. And riding down Main Street silhouetted against that apocalyptic sky came Victor Crane and his 5 remaining men, with Sheriff Hollister lurking at the back. The hour of decision had arrived. Cole checked his Colts, then his Winchester. He looked around at the men and women who had chosen to stand with him. Ordinary people facing extraordinary evil. Farmers and shopkeepers and teachers facing hired guns, and a man driven mad by grief. The odds were still poor. The outcome still uncertain. But as Cole looked at Sarah sitting straight in her wheelchair, her chin lifted in defiant hope, he knew that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the odds. "Hope is not a thing you find," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. "It's a thing you choose, even when darkness surrounds you. Especially then, you choose to believe that light still exists somewhere, and you fight to reach it." Sarah heard him and smiled. "That's beautiful, Mr. Brennan. You should write that down." Cole returned the smile. "If we live through this, Sarah Grace, I just might." Then he stepped out into the fading light to face the storm that was coming. Outside, Victor Crane dismounted and stood in the center of the street, his shadow stretching long across the dust. The sun was a red coal on the horizon, and darkness was gathering fast. The time for talk was over. The time for choosing had come. And Redemption Springs would either live up to its name or burn in the failing light of a Texas sunset. The sun touched the western horizon, bleeding crimson across the Texas sky like a wound in the heavens. Victor Crane stood in the center of Main Street, his 8 hired guns flanking him in a loose semicircle, their hands resting on their guns with the casual readiness of men accustomed to violence. 50 yards away, Cole Brennan stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, his Winchester held ready. Beside him were Dutch McKinley, Thomas Sullivan, and Ezra Yates. 4 men against 7. Crane 5 hired guns and a corrupt sheriff. Behind them, spread across the width of the street, stood the citizens of Redemption Springs, unarmed but unafraid, witnesses to whatever was about to unfold. "This is your last chance," Crane called out, his voice carrying clearly in the evening stillness. "Give me the girl and walk away. Continue this foolishness, and people will die. Good people, your neighbors, your friends. Is one child worth that price?" Cole felt the weight of every eye on him, felt the responsibility of all those lives pressing down on his shoulders. One word from him could end this peacefully. One word could save the town from destruction, but it would condemn Sarah to darkness. "The child is not yours to take, Cole," replied his voice, steady and firm. "She has a name. She has a family. She has worth beyond whatever twisted accounting you use to justify your crimes, and we will not surrender her to you." Crane's hand moved toward his pistol. "Then you choose death." "What I choose," Cole said quietly, "is to stand between evil and innocence. What I choose is to keep a promise I made to a little girl who has suffered enough. What I choose is redemption." The word hung in the air, and Crane actually laughed, the sound bitter and harsh. "Redemption. Is that what you think this is about? I tried redemption. I tried being good and decent and playing by the rules. And my daughter died screaming because I could not afford medicine that existed but was priced beyond my reach. There is no redemption in this world, Mr. Brennan, only power and those too weak to seize it." "Maybe you're right," Cole said. "Maybe the world is cruel and indifferent, but that doesn't mean we have to be. Every time we choose kindness over cruelty, we redeem a little piece of this broken world. Every time we protect the helpless, we prove that evil does not get the final word." "Pretty speech, Crane," said, his hand now gripping his pistol. "Let us see if it stops bullets." The tension stretched to breaking point. Cole's finger moved to the trigger of his Winchester. The hired gun spread out wider, creating crossfire angles. The citizens behind Cole stood frozen, awaiting the thunder of gunfire that would shatter the evening peace. And then, cutting through the silence like a clarion call, came the sound of approaching horses. Many horses, moving fast from the south. Everyone turned to look. Down Main Street, silhouetted against the dying light, came a column of riders. 7 men on horseback, moving at a steady canter. The lead rider wore a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat, and even from a distance, the badge on his chest caught the last rays of sunlight and threw them back like a signal fire. U.S. Marshal John Tucker had arrived, and beside him, in an enclosed carriage that bounced and rattled over the rough ground, came 2 more figures. A man in dark ministerial clothing, a woman in a traveling dress, her face pressed against the carriage window, her eyes searching desperately. The carriage pulled to a halt in the middle of the street. The door flew open before it had fully stopped, and Elizabeth Hartford tumbled out, her elegant dress dusty from travel, her hair escaping its pins. She looked wildly around the street, taking in the armed men, the tense standoff, the witnesses gathered in the fading light. Then her eyes found Sarah sitting in her wheelchair on the sidewalk, and the world seemed to stop. Sarah Elizabeth breathed. Then louder a cry, torn from the deepest place in her heart. "Sarah." Sarah's head whipped around at the sound of that voice, the voice she had heard in her dreams for 4 years, the voice she thought she would never hear again outside of memory. "Mama." The word was barely a whisper, disbelieving, afraid to hope. "Mama, is that really you?" Elizabeth ran. Propriety and dignity forgotten. She ran across the dusty street and fell to her knees beside the wheelchair, her hands reaching out to touch Sarah's face, as if to confirm she was real and not some cruel illusion. "Oh, my baby," Elizabeth sobbed, pulling Sarah into her arms. "My precious baby girl. We never stopped looking, never stopped loving you, never stopped hoping." Sarah clung to her mother with desperate strength, 4 years of loneliness and fear and suffering pouring out in great, heaving sobs. "Mama, Mama. I tried to be brave. I tried to remember. I tried." Reverend Michael Hartford had climbed down from the carriage more slowly, his movements stiff from the long journey. But when he reached his wife and daughter, he dropped to his knees beside them, his arms encircling them both, his tears falling freely. "Sarah Grace," he said, his voice breaking. "Our miracle. Our answered prayer." The reunion transfixed everyone in the street. Even Crane's hired guns had lowered their weapons, unwilling to interrupt such a moment. Even the hardest hearts in Redemption Springs felt the power of a family torn apart and now made whole. Marshal Tucker dismounted and walked toward Crane with the deliberate pace of a man who held the full authority of federal law behind him. He was 42, lean and weathered, with gray eyes that missed nothing, and a mouth set in a line that suggested he had seen too much of humanity's darkness to be easily shocked or deceived. Victor Crane Tucker said, his voice carrying the weight of pronouncement. "You are under arrest for kidnapping, human trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, and operating a criminal enterprise across state and territorial lines." He gestured to his deputies, who moved forward with iron manacles ready. Crane stood frozen, watching the Hartford family embrace, watching his entire world collapse around him. For a moment his hand tightened on his pistol, and Cole tensed, ready to fire if Crane made a move toward the family. But then something broke in Crane's face. Some final barrier gave way. His hand released the gun and fell to his side. He looked at Sarah, really looked at her, perhaps seeing her as a person for the first time rather than as a commodity or a problem to be solved. "She has your eyes," Crane said to Elizabeth, his voice distant and strange. "Your daughter. The same color as my Anna's eyes. Blue like summer sky." Elizabeth looked up at him, and in her face was not hatred, but a terrible aching pity. "I am sorry for your loss, Mr. Crane," she said quietly. "No parent should have to bury a child. But that loss did not give you the right to steal mine, to steal anyone's children. Your pain does not justify inflicting pain on others." Crane stood silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly as if coming to some internal decision. When he spoke, his voice was stripped of all pretense, all justification, all the elaborate reasoning he had built to excuse his crimes. "You are right," he said. "I told myself I was balancing scales, redistributing blessings. But I was just spreading my pain, making other families suffer because mine had suffered. And that makes me not a crusader for justice, but simply a man who chose to become the thing I hated most." He looked at Sarah one more time. "I am sorry, child. For what it is worth, I am sorry. Not because I was caught, but because I finally see what I became." Marshal Tucker's deputies moved forward and secured the manacles around Crane's wrists. The remaining hired guns were similarly restrained, their brief moment of solidarity with evil ending in chains and the certain knowledge of prison time ahead. Tucker turned to Cole. "Mr. Brennan, I received your telegram 3 days ago. Would have been here sooner, but finding the Hartfords and verifying their identity took time. Sarah's description of her home, her family, her life, it all matched, down to the smallest detail." He pulled out a small notebook and consulted it. 42 Mesquite Street. Cole handed her a pencil and a paper. "Can you draw how you got here?" Sarah sketched for several minutes. When finished, she had drawn a detailed map. San Antonio, a river, a mission bell tower, the valley. "I remember everything. They moved me 6 times. I memorized every route, just in case." Cole stared at the map. "You're not just brave, Sarah Grace. You're smart. Real smart." Yellow roses in the garden, a church bell that rings every Sunday at 9 in the morning. A piano in the front parlor where Mrs. Hartford gives lessons to neighborhood children. Every word true. Sarah remembered, Cole said quietly. She never forgot. 4 years in darkness, and she held on to the light. Tucker nodded, then raised his voice so the entire street could hear. "By the authority vested in me as a United States Marshal, I am placing Victor Crane and his associates under arrest. They will be transported to Fort Worth to stand trial for their crimes." Marshal Tucker turned to Sheriff Hollister, who had been trying to edge away. "Sheriff Wade Hollister, you are also under arrest for corruption, obstruction of justice, and aiding a criminal enterprise." 2 deputies removed his badge. The former sheriff offered no resistance. He paused, looking around at the gathered citizens. "I have also been authorized to investigate a network of child trafficking that appears to extend across 3 territories. Mr. Crane has agreed to cooperate fully in exchange for mercy the court may or may not grant. His records indicate that 12 children were taken over the past 8 years. A murmur ran through the crowd. Dutch stepped forward, his voice shaking. "My granddaughter, Annie McKinley, is she among them?" Tucker consulted his notebook again. According to Crane's records, a girl matching that description was placed with a family in Amarillo, a banker and his wife who could not have children of their own. They paid $5,000 and renamed her Emma. The family will be located and the situation investigated. His voice softened slightly. "I cannot promise what we will find, Mr. McKinley. The child has been with them for 6 years. She may not remember you. She may have formed attachments to her new family. This will be complicated." Dutch nodded, tears streaming down his weathered face. "But she is alive." "That is more than I dared hope. That is everything." The crowd began to disperse as the crisis passed, the tension draining away like water from a broken dam. People embraced. Some wept. Others simply stood in the gathering darkness, processing what had happened and how close their town had come to violence. Cole stood apart, watching the Hartford family. They remained kneeling in the street, holding each other, speaking in low voices that carried the weight of 4 lost years, trying to compress themselves into moments of reunion. He should walk away, give them privacy. His role in Sarah's life was finished. He had kept his promise. She was safe. She was home. But then Sarah looked up and saw him watching. She reached out her hand, beckoning him closer. "Mr. Brennan," she called, "please, come here." Cole walked over slowly, feeling awkward and out of place. These were her real parents, her real family. He was just an old cowboy who had happened to find her. "Mama, Papa," Sarah said, still holding her mother's hand, but extending her other toward Cole. "This is Cole Brennan. He saved me. He protected me. He taught me that I have worth." Elizabeth stood and walked to Cole, and before he could react, she had wrapped her arms around him, this stranger who had given her back her daughter. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest. "Thank you for being there when we could not be. Thank you for keeping her alive. Thank you for giving us back our miracle." Michael Hartford stood as well, extending his hand. "Mr. Brennan, we owe you a debt we can never repay. Our daughter tells us you have been alone for many years, that you lost your own family. Perhaps if you are willing, you might consider becoming part of ours." Cole looked at Sarah, who was smiling through her tears, nodding eagerly. "We are going home to San Antonio," Michael continued. "Sarah has a long recovery ahead. Doctors to see, therapy for her legs, healing of wounds both physical and spiritual. And she has asked quite insistently that you come with us." "I am just a rancher," Cole said slowly. "I know horses and cattle and hard work. I do not know cities or civilized society." "You know how to keep promises," Sarah said. "You know how to make someone feel safe. You know how to love when it is hard. Those are the things that matter." Cole felt something shift in his chest, some final piece of the wall he had built around his heart 17 years ago, crumbling into dust. He looked at this family broken and now mending, and he saw a place for himself. Not as a replacement for what they had lost, but as an addition, a chosen family built on shared trauma and mutual care. "I would be honored," he said quietly. The journey to San Antonio took 4 days. The Hartfords had hired a comfortable carriage for Sarah with cushioned seats and a roof to keep out sun and rain. Cole rode alongside on his mare, close enough to talk, but far enough to give the family space to reconnect. He watched as Elizabeth brushed Sarah's hair each evening, singing the song Sarah had remembered through 4 years of captivity. He listened as Michael read to his daughter from the Bible, his voice gentle, and full of a faith that had been tested but not broken. He saw the way Sarah slowly relaxed, slowly, allowed herself to believe that this was real, that she was truly going home. On the third night, camped beneath stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Sarah asked the question that had been building. "Mr. Brennan, what will you do in San Antonio? You are a man of wide open spaces. The city will feel like a cage." Cole considered this. It was a fair question. He had lived alone for so long, had built his life around solitude and silence. The noise and crowds of a city would be difficult, perhaps impossible. But then he looked at Sarah, and he remembered her courage in the face of evil, her determination to speak truth even when it would have been easier to stay silent, her capacity for hope despite 4 years of reasons to despair. "I reckon I will figure it out," he said. "I have survived worse things than new places and new ways, and I have a reason to try now, a reason worth the discomfort." Sarah smiled and settled back against her mother's shoulder, content. San Antonio in December was alive with preparations for Christmas. Lights strung across the streets, merchants calling out their wares, the smell of fresh bread and roasting meat, and pine boughs decorating doorways. The city was everything Cole had feared, loud and crowded and overwhelming, but it also had a vitality that he found himself drawn to despite his reservations. The Hartford home at 42 Mesquite Street was a modest Victorian house, painted white with green shutters, exactly as Sarah had described. A church stood next door, its bells ringing the hours, just as Sarah remembered. Elizabeth's piano sat in the front parlor. Yellow roses, dormant now for winter, waited in the garden for spring. Cole was given a room on the first floor, small but comfortable, with a window overlooking the garden. It was the first time in 17 years he had slept in a proper bed under a roof that was not his own. The first time he had been part of a household, part of a family. It was strange, unsettling, and somehow right. The months that followed brought change to them all. Sarah began treatment with doctors who specialized in spinal injuries. The prognosis was cautiously optimistic. The paralysis was not from spinal damage, but from severe nerve compression. With therapy, with exercises, with time, she might walk again. The work was painful and slow. There were days when Sarah cried from frustration and exhaustion, days when she wanted to give up. But Cole was there encouraging her, reminding her of her own words. "You told a street full of armed men that you would rather die than surrender," Cole said on one particularly difficult day. "You can handle a few more leg exercises." Sarah laughed through her tears and tried again. Cole found work as well. Michael suggested he serve as security for the church, protecting offerings and keeping watch during evening services. It was not ranching, but it was purpose. It was contribution. And it brought Cole into contact with the community, with people who slowly became friends rather than strangers. 3 years passed, years of healing and growth and slow recovery. Sarah learned to walk again, first with braces, then with canes, and finally on her 11th birthday, she walked unassisted from one end of the parlor to the other while her family wept and cheered. "Look, Papa Bear," she said, using the nickname she had given Cole. "I am walking. I am really walking." Cole stood and watched his weathered face streaming with tears. "I knew you would, Sarah Grace. Never doubted it for a second." That summer, on a warm Sunday morning in June of 1889, the congregation of Mission San Antonio de Padua gathered for a special ceremony. Sarah stood at the altar no longer in a wheelchair, but standing on her own 2 feet, flanked by her parents. And beside them stood Cole Brennan, dressed in a borrowed suit that fit poorly but looked fine enough for the occasion. Reverend Michael Hartford faced the congregation, his voice filling the church. "We are gathered today to celebrate family. Not just the family we are born into, but the family we choose. The family we build through love and sacrifice and shared trials." He turned to Cole. "Cole Brennan, you saved my daughter when she was lost. You protected her when she was in danger. You taught her that she has worth when the world tried to convince her otherwise. Today we formalize what has been true in our hearts for 3 years. Today you become Sarah's godfather, officially recognized by church and law." Cole knelt beside Sarah, and she placed her small hand on his weathered one. "Do you promise?" Michael continued to guide and protect this child, "as long as you draw breath, to be a source of strength and wisdom. To love her as your own I do." Cole said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise." Sarah spoke then, her voice clear and strong. "And I promise to honor you as my Papa Bear, to remember your teachings, to carry forward the courage you showed me. You gave me back my life. I will spend it making you proud." The congregation erupted in applause. Dutch McKinley was there, reunited with his granddaughter Annie, though she now went by Emma, and lived between 2 families loved by both. Thomas Sullivan was there, his wife beside him. Ezra Yates, Abigail Thornton, Martha, and a dozen others who had stood in the street that day in Redemption Springs and chosen courage over fear. After the ceremony, as the celebration spilled out into the church garden, Sarah pulled Cole aside. "Papa Bear," she said quietly, "I have been thinking about what happened to me, about what happened to other children. I want to help them." "How?" Cole asked. "I want to be a teacher, but not just any teacher. I want to teach children who have been hurt, who have been told they are worthless. I want to show them what you showed me, that broken does not mean useless. That survival is its own form of strength." Cole felt pride swell in his chest. "That is a fine calling, Sarah Grace. You will be wonderful at it." Years passed. Cole aged, his hair going fully white, his steps slowing. But he lived to see Sarah graduate from university, lived to see her open the Brennan School for Children with Disabilities, named in his honor, lived to see her marry a good man, a doctor who specialized in helping children recover from trauma. On a cold December day in 1899, Cole Brennan died peacefully in his sleep at the Hartford home, 71 years old, and surrounded by the family he had chosen and who had chosen him. His funeral was attended by hundreds, former students of Sarah's school, families whose children had been helped by her advocacy, citizens of Redemption Springs who had traveled to pay their respects to the man who had taught them that ordinary people could stand against extraordinary evil. Sarah stood at his graveside, her husband beside her, her hand resting on her swollen belly where her first child grew. She was 22 years old, a successful educator and advocate, about to become a mother herself. Papa Bear once told me, Sarah said to the gathered mourners that promises kept are worth more than gold. He kept every promise he made to me. He promised to protect me, and he did. He promised to teach me my worth, and he did. He promised to love me, and he never stopped. She paused, wiping tears from her eyes. Today I make a promise to him. I will spend my life helping children like I once was, so that his legacy, his choice to care, when the world said not, to lives on forever. The headstone was simple, carved from Texas limestone. It read, Cole Brennan, 1828 to 1899, Cowboy Ranger Father. He saved lives by choosing to live again. 20 years later, in 1919, an elderly woman with gray, streaked blonde hair stood before a classroom of children, some in wheelchairs, some on crutches, some bearing scars both visible and invisible. On her desk sat a photograph of a weathered cowboy holding a small girl, both of them smiling. "My name is Sarah Grace Brennan Hartford," she said to her students, "and I am going to tell you a story. A story about a man who was broken and a girl who was broken, and how they saved each other by choosing to believe that broken does not mean worthless." Outside, the Texas sun shone bright and warm, and somewhere in the wide open spaces, Cole Brennan had loved the wind, sang through the mesquite trees, carrying his legacy forward into a future he had helped create. Some promises are worth keeping, some families are chosen, some love lasts forever. And redemption, true redemption, is always possible for those brave enough to reach for it. The end.